Are you ever confused about compatibility, whether or not you or your partner, the person that you're dating, if you're on the same page and define compatibility in the same way? Or you've been in a relationship and after a certain period of time, you realize you thought you were compatible, but now you realize that you're not. Let's talk about how we define compatibility, how it helps us create securely attached connections and healthy relationships. I'm Alan Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator, and I'd like to talk about how to heal attachment injuries and improve our relationships. And this video is going to explore a conversation that comes up often in couples counseling when I'm working with couples, and usually couples come to see me after they've been together a certain period of time, and so they have some history. And perhaps they once thought that they were compatible, or they thought that each other defined compatibility in the same way. When we really start opening up that conversation, we realize not only are they defining it completely differently, but the things that they're focusing on is not really helping create secure connection. So what the heck am I talking about? We're gonna be very specific of thinking in terms of compatibility around emotional openness, emotional awareness, intimacy, vulnerability, and the degree to which we create connection, the frequency. Actually, I've created 5 categories: frequency, consistency, depth, congruence, and continuity. So I'm going to move through all 5 of these areas. Now, before I do, let's talk about what we're not talking about. So compatibility oftentimes is thought of as interests, as likes, as dislikes. You like spaghetti, they like sushi, you eat dinner at 7 o'clock, they eat dinner at 9 o'clock. And those perhaps are rather very, very simple examples. They're not that complex, but you can see what I mean. It's about comparing, what kind of movie do you like? What TV shows do you watch? What part of town do you want to live in? These things might be helpful to spark some conversation. They might be important to you, that you want to generally be on the same page about these likes and dislikes and preferences. But ultimately what I'm saying is whether or not you both like pizza or you both have some other interest in a particular type of genre of movie, that's really not going to help you create a secure foundation of healthy attachment so that you can practice vulnerability, practice intimacy, and practice showing up emotionally for each other, which is about emotional availability. So that's why you and I here, we're not going to explore preferences and likes and dislikes. We're also not going to talk about compatibility as social standing, as social circles, operating in the same communities, going to the same school, having the same lifestyle. This might also mean socioeconomic groups such as money and, where you're at income-wise, and you perhaps want to find someone who's within the same range of your income. That's fine for a personal preference. I don't really know if that's going to help you build a relationship. And we might say that compatibility is really unrelated to those things. If you have a hierarchy of importance, and at the top of your list is emotional openness, that's really what it's all about: showing up for each other and practicing within a comfort zone, a range that is comfortable to both of you, and to begin to return to that place of an emotional investment and to keep showing up on a regular basis. And we start to notice the pattern. It creates kind of harmony. So compatibility as this harmony of emotional openness. Now, we're also not going to talk about life goals. We're not going to talk about having some shared vision of the future. We're compatible because we're both entrepreneurs and we both want to build a business, and we're compatible because we want to live overseas. Again, if that's important to you, that's totally fine. It's just not necessarily going to strengthen an attachment bond. It might make your life a little more convenient. It might mean that your dreams and aspirations are in alignment. but it all might not necessarily strengthen the connection that you have with your partner or the person that you're dating. And then very lastly, physical sexual attractions or looks. We're not talking about that compatibility. Now, I know for many of us, it's pretty much a given. It's very rather universal that that's important to a number of people. So yeah, I want to, physically be attracted to them. I want there to be some kind of sexual chemistry. So we're not saying that that's off the table. Of course, that's something we think about and something that's very important in our relationship. But we're not using that as information to say that we're compatible. It might just mean that, well, they're good looking, or they really enjoy the way you look, or you have great sexual connection. Having great sexual connection doesn't necessarily translate into being compatible. It doesn't mean that you're emotionally available. It doesn't know that you know how to show curiosity and inquire about the other person and invite them to reveal their emotional truth, what's going on for them in their inner world. So all of these areas are a bit more under the heading of like personal choice. If that's a personal choice that you make, type of relationship you want, totally fine. Not what I'm focusing on here. We're going to focus on compatibility as degrees of emotional vulnerability and closeness. We're going to talk about compatibility as falling within a shared range or a window of attunement. Now, there's also a word that's used here often. It's a bit of a clunky psychotherapy word, but it's called limbic resonance. There's this limbic brain, a part of your brain, the seat of emotion, your attachment system, and there's this experience when two people sync up and we're on the same page. Think in terms of dancers, like ballroom dancing, and you sort of lose. You lose like where one person ends and the other person begins, and the dance becomes this like third entity, like they're dancing, and it's not like they're dancing separately. They are together now. They're this unit, and it's as if they can anticipate the movement of the other, and they start moving in this choreography in a very they're mirroring each other's movements, and they're in sync. When we're experiencing that, not necessarily in a movement sense, like the example I gave of dancing, but we're experiencing that in an emotional sense, that we're on the same page emotionally, we're sharing emotionally to a particular depth or degree that the other person is. We are both showing curiosity for the other's experience, and we're playing off of each other. There's this dialogue, this back and forth, and sometimes that dialogue is literally talking, sometimes that dialogue is body language, sometimes that dialogue is an acknowledgement of emotional experience or acknowledgement of feelings that are coming up. For example, I'm feeling sad right now. When you talk about that experience at work, I'm assuming that it's really challenging you and some sadness, because I can even feel the sadness right now. It's an empathy. And the other person would say, well, actually, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I am sad. And then the other person says, tell me a little more about that sadness. I mean, what's that like to go to work and struggle so much and not really want to be there, and you feel that difficult feeling of the sadness. And that just keeps going. That's engagement. Now, it doesn't need to be about sadness. It doesn't need to be, a difficult, serious conversation. It can be light and fun and have levity and bring humor. But it's all about saying, I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to you, and you're paying attention to me, and I can see that you're paying attention to me. And that even makes me want to pay more attention to you. And we just, I've often talked about this as like tennis. We're playing tennis back and forth. And it's not that there's actual physical tennis ball. What these are bids for connection. Their energy. It's like an openness. It's saying, hey, over here. It's like, think of kids on the playground, and it's basically like yelling at your friend across the playground, saying, hey, come over here. Do you want to, I can't think of it, play kickball, and then the other friend, accepts the invitation and runs to the other side of the playground. But again, these metaphors I don't necessarily mean in the literal sense, but the visual really helps to see that there's this this back and forth rhythm. And compatibility is, are we within the same rhythm? Now, you know what it's like, I'm assuming, to see two dancers, who they are not in the same rhythm. And you instantly, your eyes see, they're off. They're not on the same beat. It's as if they don't even see each other. It's like they're two individuals who are completely disconnected. They're in their own little world, and yet they're dancing next to each other, but you can tell they're not dancing with each other. There is a unawareness of the other person's experience. Now, in addition to being aware of the other person's experience, we have to be willing to take a risk within ourselves. So this is challenging because it's a bit sophisticated. These skills of emotional attunement, the skills of limbic resonance, being able to pay attention both to your inner world process, because we're strengthening within ourselves to hold a dual awareness. Dual awareness is I'm monitoring my own inner world, but I'm also paying attention and available and present to perhaps what might be information or clues, or when the person I'm with is revealing their inner world. And I will invite them through showing curiosity, through smiling, through touch, through listening, through revealing myself and taking the lead to share an idea, to share a thought, to share a feeling. And other times I will step back and wait for them to take the lead. So it's this back and forth process of paying attention to each other, having a dual awareness so that we're both monitoring ourselves and monitoring the other person, and then noticing the congruence, noticing the pattern, noticing the harmony, or the opposite of that, the disconnect, the discord, the polarity, how things are out of sync, out of balance. And if you are within a particular window or range of a shared, what we'd say, compatibility of an emotional attunement and a willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to be intimate at the same level. So both of you can negotiate and say, I don't like vulnerability. I really am not willing to reveal myself. And the other person says, that's great, because that's how I feel too. I feel really fearful of opening myself up. So I'm going to open myself up slowly, and I'm not going to initiate very much. I might connect with you emotionally maybe once a week. And even then, after I do it, I feel very cautious. Now, let's say the other person that you're talking to, they say, that's great. That really is my speed. That seems good for me too. I need a lot of time between our emotional openness in order to integrate it, to process it, to feel safe and secure. So you know what? It sounds like we're compatible, because I'm okay with that maybe once a week kind of disclosure and openness. Now, I know some of you watching the video right now, you're hearing that and your head is just exploding. You're like, no, that's not enough. That's so infrequent, because some of us want emotional connection, emotional openness, to practice vulnerability, to practice revealing ourselves, to practice being intimate together. We want that 2 or 3 times a day. We want that every 2 days. We want that, and one way is not the other, or is not better than the other, but we're trying to find someone who is compatible with that particular frequency. Let me name the areas that I want to go through specifically, and in some ways I'm already introducing them, but frequency. We're going to really think in terms of, all of these go together, and they equal, are you compatible? So if you have a similar frequency. Next, we're going to look at consistency. Is there the same similar consistency? We're going to talk about depth. And I mean that, I'll explain what I mean by that. And then congruence, is it all fitting together? And continuity. some of these words overlap. You might find that, I'm using some of a similar explanation for both categories. I hope that I'm able to differentiate them enough so that, that they do seem like their own category. So frequency means the number of times that you will come together. How frequently do you want to see each other? How frequently do you want to be vulnerable? How frequently do you want to talk about intimacy? How frequently do you want to show up for each other? This has a unit of time. There's a concreteness to this. Could be, looking at a time frame of days or weeks or months. So how often do you like to connect? And then getting that information, having that conversation with your partner. Keep in mind also our answers change, and sometimes our answers can change dramatically and quickly. So people in the first 6 weeks of dating might answer this question a little differently when they're 3 months into beginning a new relationship, when they're 6 months into a new relationship, after 2 years. And we assume that it doesn't mean that it's once we decide we're going to be emotionally open, oh good, we've checked that box, we're good, we're always emotionally open. Usually what most of us do is we practice a little bit of openness, and then we retreat, and we need to protect ourselves. We need to make sense of, okay, how did that go? Is it safe to do it again? Was I received? What does it feel like that I shared in that way? And again, sharing could be literally talking, but doesn't need to be talking. It could be in the form of presence, availability, even eye contact, just looking at each other and knowing, oh, wow, you're here for me. I see you. I'm here for you too. And the frequency, the degree to which you want to do this over a period of time is going to show whether or not you're compatible. Now, if this is really important to you and you want to do this 3 or 4 times a day, and that this is the place how you would define relationship, and this is very valuable, of a value to you, and you pick someone who just is not interested. It's not so much that they lack the skill, maybe they lack the skill, but a lot of the communication these days about attachment styles and looking at relationships is approaching it from the perspective of deficiency, and usually it's the other partner, the unavailable partner, they're deficient and they need to change. It's also just very possible that this is not who they are. And you both chose to enter a relationship without fully knowing where your shared compatibility is with regards to vulnerability and intimacy and emotional openness. Let's keep going. This means, if we're talking about frequency, we're talking about how we come together. And coming together here means the spending quality time. Coming together means being vulnerable and intimate together, which I've already mentioned that one multiple times. It also means how we show caring. Some people are very loving. Some people have a great bond and connection, and they're very committed, but they're not very demonstrative. And that's perfectly fine if they pick a partner who's also not very demonstrative, and they're not really into talking about their feelings. They're not really into, openly hugging each other on a regular basis. But their relationship works for them. It's great because they are compatible within that range of what feels comfortable and appropriate to them. Now, if you're mismatched and you're with someone who's not demonstrative, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong and they have to change and they have to come up to your level. That's a lot of the conversation these days is about, in order to repair a relationship, that we need then the other person to buy into our frequency of vulnerability and intimacy. And if they don't, then they are inadequate. And it's very possible that it's not about inadequacy, it's also about ability. And sometimes, some of us, we don't want to change. And that's not a stubbornness, that's not a guardedness, that's not an avoidance. This is a choice. And therefore, we have to find people who are making the same choices regarding intimacy, emotional openness, and vulnerability. when we talk about the frequency means coming together, this might mean eye contact, this might mean talking, it might mean about having a shared experience, doing things together. Again, this idea of going on a vacation and you're standing at the Grand Canyon and you're this big wave of kind of awe, the experience of the vastness, the grandness of the Grand Canyon. And you just look over at your partner and you're feeling moved, and your partner gives you that look of, wow, this is meaningful. This is really meaningful. And maybe some of you, maybe you watching this might use the word spiritual. You're having like a shared transpersonal spiritual moment. And that, let's say that's important to you. That's what you want in your relationship. So we're going to be looking at the frequency of, well, how often do you have this shared meaningful experience? This also means how often you are willing to really engage each other. What this means is, some of us, we like our alone time. If we get home from work, we might not want to talk for the first hour, and we'll say, well, we need to decompress. I need to pull myself together. And this can be very challenging if the other partner, maybe that's you, doesn't want that downtime, would really value and hope that there's a bit more engagement. So if you're not on the same page compatibility-wise to just how frequently you want to engage each other, that's going to prove whether or not you have some congruence, on the same page, harmony, or the opposite of that is a feeling of confusion, discord, disconnect. This also means if we're talking about frequency, and this is really a very, very important word, it's about curiosity. We can reduce all of this down to the skill, the practice, the awareness of being curious about each other. Now, this doesn't just mean be curious about what the person did. This doesn't mean just be curious about details and chronology and the external. So what I mean is to be curious, say, well, did you fill out that form and turn it into the bank so that we can get approved for that loan? I mean, you might need to know that piece of information, but that's not really finding out that much about the other person. You're also not inviting an open conversation for either people to reveal themselves. But if maybe you say, hey, I'm curious, did you go to the bank? And I know that you felt a little cautious about turning in that application because you're fearful we're going to get turned down. Hey, I'm wondering, do you want to talk about that financial fear and how our future is at stake here? Because that's a big deal. And I'm assuming it feels very stressful for you. So right there, we're great. I'm curious. Tell me what it's like to fill out this application for the bank loan that you might be denied. And if you do, your standard of living or what you want to do next in the chapter of your life might be impacted. That creates a lot of stress. And so having the curiosity to notice that in a partner, notice that within ourselves, and then say, hey, are you interested in engaging around this experience? So we're talking about being able to show curiosity for each other's inner world, for each other's states of mind, for each other's feelings and emotions and challenges and confusion and dreams and aspirations. Not just, hey, what did you have for lunch at work? Those are those external happenings. What happened? Well, I got in the car and I went to the car wash. I had to pick up my dry cleaning. I ran into my friend at the grocery store. We talked about we're going to play golf in 3 days. Okay, a bunch of details. Now, I'm going to say the same thing that I said multiple times already. If that is what you want, if that is important, you're not interested in deeper levels of curiosity, either to lead with that yourself and or to find a partner who's curious about you, well, then that's great. Then, chances are you're going to find a compatible partner and you're going to talk about the dry cleaning a lot and you're going to be really, really happy because you're not really going to talk about the other things that are going on for you. And if that is accepted, if that is what you want, then go for it. And some of us, perhaps you watching this video, you want a little more than that surface level conversation. And it can feel very, very painful. And that surface level conversation, the lack of depth, can activate our nervous system in the form of it's triggering, because it feels like we're being ignored. It feels like we don't matter. It feels like the other person's not taking an interest in our interest, and or we will show an interest in what their experience is, and they don't engage back. They perhaps are shut down. They perhaps are guarded. They perhaps deflect. They change the subject. So what we're looking for, compatibility, is really finding out, back to what I said, the frequency, the consistency, depth, congruence, and continuity. When we have a shared frequency, the number of times that we're sharing intimacy and vulnerability, this is affirming that they're into you. And don't we want that information? Don't we want that reality check? And when we're on the same page with the frequency of investing in each other and getting to know each other, well, then you're also going to communicate to them through your actions that you want to see them. So they want to see you, they're into you, you're into them, and you know this because you're falling within a range of a shared compatibility around intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional openness. So let's keep going. The next one has to do with consistency. Again, there's going to sound like maybe a little overlap here, but we're talking about a repetition. So we have the frequency. I'd like to be emotionally open, every other day or 5 times a day, like whatever it is. But whatever that shared frequency is, then we want to know, well, do we maintain it? And maintaining means, is there a consistency? Is 1 week you're like really emotionally close and there's practicing showing up for each other, and then the next week it changes really quickly, and there's this it's so hard to, it's sporadic or random or intermittent. And so even though we think that we have the same frequency of wanting to connect, we're noticing that it doesn't sustain itself. There's not this consistency. We're looking for the repetition of the schedule of our connecting so that a pattern emerges. Our nervous system, our attachment system loves the pattern of consistency because it gives us an ongoing, regular amount of trust, safety, and nourishment. We feel nourished, we feel energized, and when the other person is showing up consistently the same way that you're showing up consistently for them, that really creates a secure attachment that's going to strengthen the attachment bond, and ultimately it means it's going to feel reliable. Consistency is about asking ourselves, well, how reliable is this frequency? We've identified the frequency, but how reliable is it that this person can show up like that on a regular basis? And we just define, like, well, what does regular basis mean for you? What does regular basis mean for me? And so we're looking at, in attachment language here, we're also talking about, it's called object constancy. There's a constant, consistent showing up, and this creates the experience of an emotional presence, and what we might even say emotional permanence. The permanence is this internalized sense of, I can trust my emotional connection with the other person, and it's right here with me. It's in me. I have a reference for it. And I can rely on that through the day, whether or not I'm talking to the person or not, whether we're having dinner or not, whether we're in the same place or not. Because the fact that we know the frequency and the consistency are within a shared range, a negotiated, accepted way of relating, then that emotional permanence is something I rely on throughout the day. And it makes me feel warm, and it makes me feel I belong, it makes me feel that I can trust my partner. And now, the same thing I've said before, keep in mind this is all subjective. that it might be that you're very spontaneous. It might be that you really like mixing up the frequency, the consistency to which you're available. And again, it just, as long as your partner knows that you're both on the same page. Now, there's a difference between like a subjectivity of spontaneity where it's about fun. Like I'm going to surprise you one day and show up at your work and say, guess what? I made dinner reservations at this place, and surprise. And you're like, oh my, I was going to the gym and I got, oh my gosh, I'm so not prepared. I'm not dressed for this. Come on, let's be spontaneous. Let's connect. And other times, so within the realm or within the understanding that there's a switching up of the consistency that is digestible, palatable, acceptable to the other person. It's not in the sense of a spontaneous changing consistency so that immediately the person feels fearful or they feel left in the dark, or they feel like there wasn't communication. Like, I thought we were having dinner tonight and you just canceled at last moment. We always have dinner on Thursdays. Now all of a sudden you just bailed on me, and this is weird. The consistency has changed. The moment the consistency changes, that's when our attachment system, our nervous system activates and says, hey, wait a minute. The person that we rely on, the frequency in which we are getting together and practicing emotional openness, that is all of a sudden the pattern has changed. And for some of us, if we have a history of attachment injuries, attachment wounds, attachment trauma, it's that shifting of the pattern that alerts us very quickly that something feels that it's off and wrong. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that there's really anything off or wrong in the relationship, but because our history of attachment wounds, it really raises an alarm, and we feel very, very alarmed. And many of us then need reassurance in that place, and need to say, hey, partner, you just changed the consistency of how we check in with each other, how we have meaningful heart-to-heart talks, how we share ourselves with a degree of openness and vulnerability. And all of a sudden, in the last 3 weeks, you're very different. You're not doing that. The frequency is, you're not consistent in how you used to do this. And the moment the pattern changes, my nervous system activates, and I perceive it as something is suspect, something is off, and does this mean that the person is distancing, pulling away? Now, if we have the skill to negotiate, we have the skill to have a meaningful conversation, and the partner might say, yeah, you're correct. Right? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so stressed right now, and I'm so fearful about X, Y, Z, or whatever it is, and I have been pulling away from you. And what they're doing is they're affirming the reality, and they're acknowledging that the frequency of connecting has changed. The consistency has shifted. The pattern is not the same pattern. When we hear that and they acknowledge, yes, the pattern has changed, there's a comfort, a potential comfort that can enter, say, well, at least we're on the same page. At least we have a shared reality. Now, perhaps, many of us know what it's like to bring that up with a partner, and the partner says, no, what are you talking about? What do you mean I've pulled away? What do you mean I'm less emotionally available? I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm completely as available as I have been 3 months ago. Why are you bringing this up? That can often, your brain okay, I realize we're on different planets now. We are not on the same page at all. We do not have a shared reality. They don't have the same experience, but they follow it up with curiosity. That's the link, that's the invite to relationship repair, where they say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I've been pulling away. I don't think I've been pulling away, but now that you tell me, I'm going to review, hey, why don't you tell me more? And how is this impacting you? Because it sounds like this is stressful. It really sounds like this. I'm sorry. I can hear that you're fearful. I hear that this is creating some anxiety for you. Come in the living room. Let's sit down. And I think I've been really clueless about how I'm behaving or how busy I'm at work, and the stuff that's going on with the other family members. And I haven't been available to you, but I also haven't been aware that I've been doing this. So how are you feeling? So you see, it's even if you're not in the same shared reality, you can at least acknowledge the other person's reality and try to get back to a place where you're both in, you're connecting. You are being emotionally open, as opposed to being guarded and closed down. So we talked about frequency. We talked about consistency. And the next we're going to talk about depth. And this means the degree and range. And I talked about it a little bit in a simplistic terms of, if we like talking about more surface things, like how deep do you want to go emotionally? And this is about degrees and range of intimacy and emotional closeness. And it brings, when we do this, it brings a feeling of being loved. Now, it's very relative, very subjective, that one person's depth might be another person's overwhelm. Or one person's depth might be another person's lack of depth. And sometimes we think we're practicing being open. We think that we're revealing ourselves. And for us, we are. But then we get feedback that the other person is experiencing us as guarded and holding back. Now, that's a little tricky. We got to really not abandon ourselves and our experience, but we do need to take in, if we want to be in a relationship, we need to take in the experience of the other person and go, well, can I see from their point of view, am I guarded? Am I avoidant? Am I holding back? Am I shut down? Am I shutting them out? And this becomes this very delicate internal negotiation with regards to comfort level and how we want to show up in relationships. And some of us come back and say, well, I don't think we're compatible, that you're looking for a certain amount of emotional openness and that will create a depth of knowing each other. I just don't think that's not how I show up in a relationship, and that's not the kind of relationship that I want. I don't think that we're compatible. Also, this could show up as meaning or worldview, the depth of like, well, tell me more. What does that mean? How did that impact you? Is this linking and connecting to other areas of your life? What's the conclusion that you're drawing about this experience or how you're feeling? What are you learning about yourself in this process? We're assigning a lot of meaning here. And again, you might or might not like that, or you say that you like it and that's really important to you, and then you find someone who does it 10 times more than you do. Wait a minute, I thought I liked meaning. I thought I was really into, offering some depth. And in comparison, subjectively, we realize, well, we're not really compatible, because our understanding of what it means to go into a particular depth of vulnerability, that's actually very different for both of us. Most of us, we're not going to find a partner who's exactly at our same place. We might find a partner who sometimes joins us and we sometimes join them. And then there's going to be a separation. And then we're going to come back, and we might, and sometimes I'm going to be a little more, offer a little bit more emotional vulnerability, and then other times my partner will. And it's not that we need to tolerate that we're not always matching up. We're looking for a range of tolerance, and within that range of tolerance, that's what we would call, and we'd say, well, we're compatible. I'm okay that you're not always joining me at a particular level of emotional openness, and sometimes I'm here and sometimes you're here, or however we visually create the depiction of that. But as long as I know that it's not too far beyond getting my needs met, as far as it's not too far beyond feeling a sense of connection and closeness. And that's what we have to ask ourselves. Now, if you've already created an attachment bond, you already love this person, but yet you conclude, I don't think that we're compatible. We're really not on the same page here, but we're already married, or we already moved in, or we've already made commitment to each other. So that's really a challenging, difficult place to be. I am going to wrap up when I'm near the end of this, going through all of these. I'm going to talk about that as well. Revealing ourselves. If we're talking about depth, it's like, well, to what degree do you want to reveal yourself? To what degree do you want to be open and transparent? And when we do this, this brings availability. This limits our guardedness, and it lets the other person know that we're available for relationship. Now, also, I put humor here, depth of humor, and I don't mean like, like humor in the sense of if it has more depth, you're funnier. I don't mean it like that. But humor is a skill, and it's a bonding skill. And if we know how to use it as a way to create connection, and we use humor as a way to maneuver difficult moments, and we use humor to create levity when life is really, really challenging, and we use humor to have a shared experience to say, humor can deliver a truth, and it's in that moment that what's funny is the truth, and in comparison or in stark contrast to what's actually happening. And when we know that we're both in on the joke, that can strengthen our connection. So what I mean here by depth of humor is just how frequently are we, how often is that showing up? And that we both know that humor is a really important skill that we're bringing to this relationship in order to strengthen the depth of our emotional connection and strengthen the ability to know each other. So, review, we're talking about frequency, we're talking about consistency, we just talked about depth. Now let's talk about congruence. So, congruence is when our feelings, thoughts, and actions generally are complementing each other and that they go together. That the feelings inform the thoughts informs the actions inform the feelings, and you can take those in any order. And so in this moment, using that example of congruence, like, are you both showing up in a similar way, and that your behaviors are matching your words and the feeling states that are being shared and are created between you, that it's all matching up with, that they all fit together. Imagine like multiple puzzle pieces, and they're all like going together, and there's not like this weird oddball shape or oddball piece that's not fitting in. When the pattern fits together, we say it has harmony. So congruence is about, yes, we have frequency, yes, we have consistency, yes, we have depth, and now all of those together is starting to create a reliable harmony. It just feels like, wow, they go together. This alignment of the frequency, the consistency, and the depth, we can compare it to, I did use the word shape. So if you think of like geometry, that congruence is a similarity in the shape and size. So let's take that word geometry, let's take literal shapes and sizes and just use it as a metaphor. And what we mean then is that is the relationship that's being described by both partners. Does it have the same shape? If we went to one partner and said, how is the relationship? And we said, how is your connection? How is the intimacy? How close are you? How often do you both like to come together? And we ask those questions of one partner, and then separately we ask the same question of the other partner. We're going to want to notice, are they pretty much saying the same thing? Are they within the range of each other's answers? And if they answer things that are really wildly different, as if they're not on the same page, we would then say the shape and size of their relationship feels really, there's a contrast here. And it doesn't look like they're congruent, as in on the same page. When this congruence is not matching, we would use words like not harmonious, discord, outside the range of matching characteristics. We're polarized, there's a conflict, there's a contrast, discrepancy, confusion, and also we might use the word disorganized here. Let's keep going. As you know, the next one is continuity. And this is very similar to consistency, frequency, consistency, depth, and congruence. And then now continuity is similar to consistency, but it's more in this context of like larger chunks of time. Well, continuity is really like stepping back and looking at the long view. And we would say, an example would be a partner says, when we first met, in the first 6 months, you were a different person. You behaved in a way that I thought you valued emotional openness, and you were emotionally open. But after about 6 months, you're really different. And I'm just noticing the continuity of who you were and who you are now. Something has changed. And so our pattern, our harmonious pattern of emotional connection, coming together and taking a break and separation and coming together, the dance, the frequency, the congruence, the depth, it's not continuing. There's not a continuity. So it seems to end, and then we've entered a different chapter. We also might refer to this as Jekyll and Hyde, that maybe even our personality is changing or their personality is changing. I am aware that some people have a belief that once they establish a connection, an attachment bond, a commitment, then they stop pursuing the other person. And they say, well, I got I got my person, I got my partner, and I don't have to put an effort to woo them, court them, date them, show up for them. It's like we're on track to get married, and I don't have to try as hard. And that's the person on the receiving end of that. But that's what we mean by a little Jekyll and Hyde. Also, this is the ability. Continuity is the ability to. It means that there's some consistent callbacks of previous vulnerability and previous sharing. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say we're in the present moment, we're talking, I share something about myself, and it's a bit emotionally open, and you mirror that, you match that, you join me, you might talk about something about yourself where you're equally emotionally open. And that's an example of very in the present moment, and that strengthens our connection, and then we're practicing vulnerability. Something in under the heading of continuity that can be very helpful to us to create a secure attachment bond is our ability to remember and recollect and reference that time that we just did that. And so 3 days later we say, hey, remember when we had that moment, that emotional openness? And remember you had remarked that I looked shy or like I was embarrassed because I felt so revealed, and you were so great. You reached out and held my hand, and 3 days has passed since we shared that moment. It was such a tender, almost fragile moment. I'm just wondering, how was that for you? And now that 3 days has passed, like, has that crossed your mind? It was really meaningful to me, and I want to know. Was it as meaningful to you? So you see, what I'm doing is I'm referencing an emotional moment. I'm referencing where something was shared, either just by one person or both people, and I'm calling attention to it. This creates a shared reality. This means that we are remembering the ways that we connected in the past, and by pulling them into the present and revisiting them, referencing them, sharing an insight. Hey, remember like 3 months ago when you said that thing, and well, I was thinking about that, and it just really made me feel so proud of you. I felt so close to you, and I don't think at the time I expressed that enough. And now that some time has passed, and I look at that period of time and how you showed up, wow, I'm really impressed with you as a loving partner. Thank you so much. So what we're doing is in that example, I'm calling attention to previous interactions, which are going to affirm not only can we use it again in this moment as meaningful, it's going to continue to anchor that original experience and say like, yeah, it was meaningful. And it was so meaningful, I'm willing to, I know I'm going to want to reference it a week from now or 3 weeks from now or 6 months from now. And when we do this, that is creating a continuity. Imagine, and perhaps you don't have to imagine, this might be your experience, that you might have a moment where you and your partner are emotionally open, and then maybe the next day, maybe 2 weeks later, it's as if that emotional openness never happened. It's as if you didn't share that connection. And if you bring it up, you're also met with like, yeah, it was a nice moment, but yeah, I haven't really thought of it since then. And it is a great skill if we can invest in monitoring the continuity, but also offering these callbacks to other emotional experiences that we have shared that can strengthen our attachment bond. Because when that happens, we really feel like, oh, you remember me. Oh, you saw me, and you're seeing me now. And thank you for acknowledging that, because then I know that you know that that's important to me. And that's going to strengthen. I feel closer to you when you do that. And chances are the other person feels closer when I do that, when we do that. Let's talk about how we use this information and what very specifically it helps us negotiate. So let's talk about how we use this information, and very specifically it's about negotiating with a partner and finding out if we're on the same page. And remember earlier what I said, we're not going to talk about compatibility as likes and dislikes and preferences. We're not talking about social standing or social circles or lifestyle, socioeconomic groups, where we live or life goals, shared vision for our future, or also even acknowledging physical, sexual attraction and how the other person looks or how we look to them. But instead, we're going to talk to our partner and say, well, what is your frequency of wanting to be emotionally open? And then what kind of consistency are we going to invest? And that's going to create a pattern and harmony. And how deep are we going to go? Are we generally on the same page about that we value a particular type of depth of emotional openness? And then over time, are we seeing some congruence where this frequency, consistency, and depth are that they're all matching up? And this is comforting because of the congruence. They go together. There's a pattern. And then the continuity, if we can see it is sustaining itself over time. There's not a lot of big changes that's going on. That means that you're reliable, I'm reliable, our relationship is reliable. And in order to feel safe, in order to build trust, in order to create a secure attachment, we're really going to want all of these areas. We want to be compatible in these 5 areas. Now, some of us, many of us, and perhaps this is you know what it's like when you're not compatible. But unfortunately, you are in a place where you're not going to end or leave a relationship. And I shouldn't say unfortunately. That's the whole point where I'm trying to make, that it doesn't have to be unfortunate. It needs to be honest with yourself. This is a recurring question that comes up many times to me in different contexts with clients, with couples, and the other person needs to acknowledge if they are not joining you in the place of emotional openness that you would prefer or that you want. And there's a limited period of time for them to say if they do or don't want to join you, if they do or don't want to learn, change, explore a skill, expand their awareness, their ability to join you at the level of emotional openness that you are looking for. And if they don't, they say, well, what do we do? We've concluded, we're not compatible. That's just the way it is. And some people have been married for 10 years or 15 years, or no, let's say, well, I thought we were compatible for the first 5 years and then things have changed. And yet you're really clear, for all the different reasons, and they're all valid reasons. And you just say, well, we're not going to end. We're not getting divorced. I'm not leaving. They're not leaving. This is it. So some of us get stuck here with a resentment and a bitterness and a demanding sense that the other person really needs to change. And until they change, we're going to feel miserable. We're going to feel like something's missing. Our life is really, it's going to build an anger and oftentimes build a resentment. And then we might be passive aggressive. We might engage protest behavior. We might act out in trying to hurt the other person. And it really takes on a life of its own, all because we're so angry that we're not compatible, but yet we've made a commitment. We know that, we've gotten married or whatever, we have kids, and we've decided we're definitely not going to end the relationship, but yet we're not compatible. So the response here of what to do is to pull focus away from thinking the other person is going to change and to say, no, nothing is changing. This is it. And the invitation then is, how do you take your grief, because this is a loss, but this is not a loss that resolves itself. It's an ongoing, chronic, complicated loss that you're going to live with for many, many years. And so the shift in focus is, well, what are your skills around grieving? And what I often do when I talk about this is I link it to the word being creative. Creatively grieve. What does it mean to be creative with the loss that you live with every day or every other day or on a regular basis? This grief bubbles up that you and your partner are not compatible. You're not sharing emotional openness and connection and creating a securely attached bond the way you would want to, but yet you know that you're going to stay committed and stay in the relationship or hold true to the commitment. So you wake up on a regular basis and there's your grief. So the invitation is to shift focus on, how do you grieve? How do you grieve what you do not get? How do you grieve what you do not have? How do you grieve what has not happened? Now, some of us get stuck here because there's this parallel with our history of attachment injuries, attachment wounds, and attachment trauma, is that many of us were wounded by what didn't happen. And I have a number of videos about this to talk about absence, emotional neglect, emotional distancing. And when we didn't have that over a period of time, especially in the developmental years, that it actually impacted us and hurt us. And it's that hurt in the realm of attachment that shows up when our needs are not being met. We revisit, or it gets reactivated, and trauma symptoms might show up. So for many of us, it's an additionally challenging, if not even alarming or dangerous feeling. Doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is dangerous, and if it is, that's another video, and that's about safety and protecting yourself. But what I mean dangerous in the sense to us emotionally, that if you're not getting your emotional needs met, but you've chosen to stay, and you're living with this grief, and the experience is the reoccurring trigger around this grief and the reoccurring trigger of residual unintegrated attachment wounds is repeatedly not getting what you need, is repeatedly being denied emotional openness and connection. And so it's possible that you're experiencing a very heightened, activated nervous system in the form of hyperarousal and speedy mind and in anxiety. And it creates a lot of obsessive thinking about the other person, what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're not doing, what they aren't saying. They meant this. Did they mean this? And we do the same thing for ourselves, but then we turn it in through the lens of shame. There must be something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm flawed. I'm a mess. I'm this, that, or the other. So you can stay with someone that you're not compatible with for whatever reason it is. And if you just so happen to have attachment injuries that show up as symptoms of trauma, the way many of us do, it might be doubly difficult for you, very hard to manage the intensity of that anxiety, because you are putting yourself in a position where you will continually be activated and continually be provoked by not having your attachment needs met, or better yet, for the sake of this video, to not falling within a compatible range where both partners have a need and an agreement and a willingness that's equal to the other person's willingness to see each other, be curious about each other, and open up. Thank you for listening to this video. Do all the things. I put effort into the videos, and do all the things. You've heard this many times. I mean, click like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. This helps circulate the video. Yes, does help me in the channel, but it also helps all of us, because the more people can see the video, the more we get word. I know that there's someone out there right now who is not feeling so great, and they're really questioning themselves about their relationship and their partner and compatibility. And maybe, just maybe, it doesn't always land for everybody, but maybe they need this information. So if you could share this video link on other social media sites, send it to a friend via email, this really helps me out. More videos on the way talking about attachment trauma and relationships. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.